Mary was absolutely, positively not a virgin.
In this video, we're going to be looking at a clip from a sermon from the preacher you just heard. His name is Caleb Lines. He's at University Christian Church, and this church is a part of the United Church of Christ. Now, this is a very, very woke and progressive church, to the point that there's no way this should be called a Christian church. Then we're going to talk about the importance of the virgin birth, and then we're going to have John MacArthur's response to people who deny the virgin birth. First, let's hear what this progressive preacher says about how the virgin birth cannot be believed.
Mary was absolutely, positively not a virgin when she gave birth to Jesus. That whole concept of virginity is kind of culturally defined anyway, but we know biologically that that is an impossibility, of course, in the 21st century.
This preacher is just saying miracles are impossible because miracles are impossible. He's really regurgitating an old philosopher named David Hume, that miracles can't happen because miracles cannot happen because it's miraculous. It can't happen because miracles don't happen. This is just foolishness. The Lord is a God of power and might, and intervenes to bring about His work and to show His glory. Next, let's look at how he describes the word virgin in Hebrew and Greek.
But even beyond that, listen to this. Matthew is trying to fulfill prophecy in Isaiah that he accidentally misinterprets. So Matthew is reading in the Greek, but the Hebrew word that Matthew interprets from Isaiah as virgin doesn't mean virgin. It means young woman. You know, in the ancient world, it was very common to say that someone was born of a virgin as a tool to foreshadow narratively that they were going to live an important life. When Matthew and Luke say that Jesus has been born of a virgin, they are putting him at odds with the Roman emperor from the very beginning of the story. They are saying, no, it's not the Roman emperor who is special. It's not the Roman emperor who is of God. It is Jesus, the Messiah.
I'm not entirely sure how much Greek and Hebrew this individual knows, but the Hebrew word found in Isaiah 7 verse 14 is the Hebrew word alma. It is a young woman before she has had a child, and it is used as a virgin here in Isaiah 7:14. And in Genesis 24, verses 43, it's used of Rebekah. But Matthew is quoting from the Septuagint, which is the Greek Old Testament, in Isaiah 7:14. And the word that is used there is parthenos. That's the Greek word, which does mean virgin. And not only does Matthew talk about a virgin birth, but also Luke does. Matthew uses this word in Matthew 1:23, Luke uses the word in Luke 1, verses 27. But I'm going to talk a bit about the virgin birth in the scriptures. It's talked about in two Gospels, Matthew chapter 1, and it's the section there on verses 18 to 25, the birth of Jesus, from the perspective of Joseph. In Matthew 1:18, Matthew records that Mary and Joseph had not yet come together, so they did not have sexual intimacy at all. And in 1 verse 20, the angel tells Joseph that this pregnancy is conceived of by the Holy Spirit. Therefore, we know that Mary has not been unfaithful to Joseph. And Matthew quotes Isaiah 7 verse 14, where the prophet writes, "A virgin shall bear a child." This is a sign to you. This is the sign of the Messiah, that a virgin will bear a child, and he will be called Emmanuel, God with us. God will dwell with his people. Isaiah 7, verse 14. And Matthew records in 1 verse 25 that Mary and Joseph were sexually pure until the birth of Jesus. There was no sexual immorality. The next recording is Luke 1, 26 to 38. In the Gospel of Luke, the birth of Jesus is told from the perspective of Mary. And at the start of the narrative, Mary is described as a virgin 2 times in chapter 1, verses 27. To a virgin betrothed to a man whose name was Joseph of the house of David, and the virgin's name was Mary. Now, Mary is afraid because the angel meets her in Luke 1:31. The angel says that she ought not to fear. What is in her is by the Holy Spirit. In 1 verse 34 of Luke, Mary says to the angel, "How will this be since I am a virgin?" Now, the Greek doesn't read the same word virgin. Literally in the Greek it says, "How can this be? I have not known a man." Mary confesses that she has not had sexual intercourse with a man. In 1 verse 35 of Luke, the angel describes what will happen to Mary. The Holy Spirit will come upon you. The Holy Spirit will cover you, will overshadow you. And the result will be a child who is holy, the Son of God. The virgin birth ought to be embraced because it's clearly taught in the Bible. It's taught in Matthew and Luke very clearly. You can use all these grammatical and syntactical things to try and disprove it, but at the end, you are always wrong. It is only because the effects of modernism and liberalism that people reject the virgin birth, because they reject miracles, because miracles can't happen. These fake and phony Bible preachers are just regurgitating old, junky, philosophical ideas. And these false teachers ought to have no credibility and should never be called preachers or reverends, and they should never be in pulpits of churches. The virgin birth of Jesus does matter. Well, why the virgin birth? The virgin birth matters because Jesus had to be fully God and fully man to be that perfect and sinless sacrifice. Jesus was and is fully divine. And that is why he had to be conceived by the Holy Spirit. The Holy Spirit came upon Mary and overshadowed her, and thus Jesus could be fully God and sinless. And many passages speak about the sinlessness of Jesus. For instance, Hebrews 4:15 and Hebrews 7:26. But Jesus also had to be fully man so that he could be that sacrifice for sin. As we see in Hebrews 2 verse 17, therefore he had to be made like his brothers in every respect so that he might become a merciful and faithful high priest in the service of God to make propitiation for the sins of the people. When you deny the virgin birth, you put the whole gospel in jeopardy. You, in essence, have to reject the gospel. Because when you deny the virgin birth, then Jesus can no longer be fully God and fully man, and thus he cannot be that perfect and sinless sacrifice for sins. And I thought I'd close with listening to John MacArthur's defense of Isaiah 7 verse 14. Let's give him a listen, and thanks for watching, and God bless.
And then in verses 22 and 23, you have the virgin birth connected. Connected. We saw it conceived and confronted, clarified in regard to the name as the message came to Joseph. But here it's connected, and it's connected to an Old Testament prophecy. Now all this took place to fulfill what was spoken by the Lord through the prophet. Behold, the virgin shall be with child and shall bear a son, and they shall call his name Emmanuel, which translated means God with us. That is a direct quote from Isaiah 7:14. Isaiah 7:14. Here, Matthew shows us that the virgin birth was promised. And if you go back to Isaiah 7:14, that's exactly what you read with the addition of just an opening statement. Therefore the Lord himself will give you a sign. Behold, a virgin will be with child and bear a son, and will call his name Emmanuel. The Lord will give you a sign. The word here, virgin, in verse 23, is parthenos in Greek, and it always means virgin, and only means virgin. It's used about 12 or 13 times in the New Testament. It always and only means virgin. The text of Isaiah, 700 years before, uses the word Alma. And some people say, well, Alma can mean a young girl. A young girl doesn't have to mean a virgin. Although it is used 9 times in the Old Testament, 8 of them, it has to mean a virgin. One time it may be just a reference to a young girl. But clearly the intent of Alma in Isaiah 7:14 is to be used as virgin, because that's what the Holy Spirit inspires Matthew to write. The New Testament writer, under the inspiration of the Holy Spirit, is interpreting the word Alma in the Old Testament as Parthenos in the New, which is virgin. And that's the only thing that makes sense. Critics like to say, well, no, Isaiah 7:14 should simply be stated, a young woman will be with child and bear a son. There's something missing in that. And what is it? The opening statement, the Lord himself will show you a sign. If I say to you, a young woman is going to become pregnant and have a son, what sign is that? That's not a sign of anything. That happens every day. That's not a sign of anything. But a virgin becoming pregnant and bearing a son, that's a sign. That's the sign of Isaiah 7:14.